She waited 7 hours at the bank. What happened when they finally saw her will shock you. A black woman walked into a bank holding a $1 million check. No one stood up. No one believed it was hers. They saw her skin, her age, her modest coat, everything but her worth. Then they made her wait. And wait. What happened next shocked everyone in that room. Now, let's hear the story. They didn't see a woman with a purpose. They saw someone taking up space. When I walked into Ashton Federal Bank that morning, I didn't come to make a scene. I wasn't dressed to impress, just clean clothes, sensible shoes, and a purse that had carried more receipts and grocery lists than I could count. Inside, it was a certified check for $1 million. That check represented 30 years of life, early mornings cleaning offices, weekends spent patching drywall in my own rental units, the nights I skipped dinner so my son could eat better. I came with pride in my steps and peace in my heart. What I didn't expect, though I should have, was the silence. The kind of silence that doesn't say, "We're busy," but rather, "We don't see you." The woman at the front desk never looked up. I waited a few moments before clearing my throat gently. She finally lifted her eyes like I had interrupted something important. "Yes?" she asked. "I'd like to open a savings account," I said. She didn't ask my name, didn't ask how much I was depositing, just motioned with her hand and said, "Take a seat. Someone will be with you." So I sat. I watched as people came in after me, clean suits, sharp heels, loud greetings. One man was offered coffee. Another was led into an office before he'd even said why he was there. Me, I became part of the furniture. An hour passed, then 2. I tried not to count the time, but when you're being ignored, the minutes grow heavy. Every time a banker came out, I sat a little straighter. Every time they called someone else's name, I softened back into the cushion like I was fading out of view. By the 3rd hour, I went back to the desk and asked if I had missed my name being called. The young man working there looked at me blankly. "We're prioritizing VIP clients right now," he said. "You're welcome to continue waiting." That word, welcome, landed bitter in my throat. I went back to my seat, now sore in both body and spirit. I wasn't angry, not yet, just disappointed. Disappointed that in 2025 a black woman in her 50s still had to prove she belonged in a bank lobby. 4 hours. 5. 7. When they finally called my name, my back was stiff, my lunch was cold in my bag, and whatever patience I had left had grown into resolve. I followed the associate to his desk and handed him my paperwork and the check. His eyes flicked over the numbers. He blinked once, then sat back in his chair. "Where did this come from?" he asked. "I sold several properties," I said. "I have the paperwork if you need it." He didn't ask for it. He just stared at the check like it had insulted him personally. "This is a significant amount," he said slowly. "We may have to flag this for review. With sums like these, especially when there's no existing relationship, we have to be cautious. You understand?" I did not understand, not in the way he meant. What I understood was the tone in his voice. I understood the implication that this money, in my hands, must have come from somewhere shady, that my skin, my age, my quiet presence made me suspicious by default. He didn't say the words, but I've been around long enough to hear the message buried beneath the polite. I said nothing, just opened my purse and took out my phone. You see, they didn't know I had a son. They didn't know that boy I raised on peanut butter and prayers was now one of the most respected civil rights attorneys in the state. They didn't know that in 15 minutes, everything about this room would shift, not because I raised my voice, but because I raised a man who knew how to use his. I hadn't come to prove anything, but sometimes the world gives you no choice but to remind it exactly who you are. For nearly an hour, Gloria Jenkins sat in the lobby without a word spoken to her. The bank was quiet, efficient, and wrapped in polished silence. Behind the reception desk, people in crisp suits clicked away at keyboards, their smiles reserved for those who dressed like them. No one asked Gloria why she was there. No one offered a greeting. She might as well have been a shadow. The seat she chose was tucked beneath a mural of handshakes and trust slogans. the kind of corporate artwork that promises belonging, but nothing about her presence in that room felt welcome. Still, she waited, her posture straight, her purse settled gently in her lap. Inside it, folded with care, was a certified check for $1 million. She hadn't come to make noise. She'd come to do something simple. Open a savings account, make a deposit. But apparently, simplicity has conditions, and she didn't meet them. Gloria watched as men in tailored jackets breezed through the lobby and were greeted with nods, some even with backpats and jokes. A woman in heels barely paused before she was whisked into a private office. Someone else was offered coffee. She, meanwhile, had only the ticking of the wall clock and the ache building in her lower back. 2 hours passed. 3. She approached the front desk. Her voice, when it came, was measured but kind. She asked if she was still in line. The young man didn't check a list, didn't click a keyboard. He looked at her like she'd forgotten her place. This branch prioritizes VIP clients, he said. You're not in that tier, but you're welcome to wait. It wasn't just the words, it was the way he said them. Neutral, dismissive, rehearsed. A tone that didn't need to explain itself. Gloria looked at him for a moment, long enough to give him a chance to reconsider his tone, but he didn't. So she nodded, turned, and sat back down. By the 5th hour, the room had changed. Staff rotated, lights shifted, but Gloria remained exactly where she'd been left. No one checked in. No one offered anything more than a quick glance. Withdrawn. It wasn't until hour 7 that her name was called. The voice came without apology, without ceremony. She stood, walked forward, and sat at the desk as calmly as she had that morning. The banker looked up, glanced at the check, then at her. His brows twitched. Something flickered across his face, surprise, maybe suspicion. It was hard to tell the difference. This is a significant amount, he said carefully. May I ask where it came from? She answered without hesitation. Decades of rental property sales, all legal, all documented. She offered proof. He didn't take it. We'll need to verify. Funds like these, coming from unfamiliar sources. He trailed off, letting the sentence hang in the air like a warning. Then he added, it's protocol. I'm sure you understand. But he wasn't sure. And she did understand, but not in the way he meant. She understood what he wasn't saying, that her presence didn't align with their expectations, that her name didn't come with a familiar last name or company, that her skin, her age, her plainness made the number on that check seem suspicious. This wasn't protocol. This was profiling in a pressed shirt. She didn't react. Her face didn't change. She'd been tested like this before in restaurants, in boardrooms, in the silence between sentences. But something about this moment, after 7 hours of being ignored, had settled differently inside her. She reached into her purse, not for the check this time, but for her phone. Because what the bank didn't know, what none of them had thought to consider, was that the woman they'd spent a full working day ignoring had built more than just a life. She'd built a legacy, and part of that legacy had a name. Elijah Jenkins, her son, a civil rights attorney, a fighter in a sharp suit, born from her sacrifices. He wasn't just her advocate. He was a mirror held up to every assumption in that building, and within the hour they'd be forced to see exactly what they had refused to look at. When Gloria was finally called to the banker's desk, the air around her felt different, not lighter, not welcoming, but sharp, like walking through a room after someone had been talking about you. 7 hours of waiting had carved a quiet strength into her posture. She sat down calmly and handed over the paperwork and the certified check with both hands, as if offering something fragile and important. The banker barely glanced at the documents before zeroing in on the number. A flicker crossed his face, not awe, not admiration, but something colder, a shift, as if the amount on the check didn't belong in her hands. He cleared his throat. This is a substantial deposit. She nodded once. Yes. And may I ask? He began slowly, his eyes not meeting hers. Where did this come from? She answered with ease. From the sale of 4 rental properties. I've brought the contracts, tax records, and sale agreements if you need to verify. He didn't ask to see them. Instead, he sat back in his chair and folded his arms. There was a pause, calculated and heavy. It's unusual, he said finally. To see this kind of sum from private sales coming in without a business account or existing financial relationship with the bank. Gloria said nothing. She'd been in enough rooms to know when someone was trying to provoke her into a mistake. He leaned forward slightly, lowering his voice in a way that only made it more intrusive. I'll be honest, Miss Jenkins. This kind of transaction can raise certain flags. We have to consider the possibility that these funds may not be fully transparent. You understand? Frank. There was no question in his tone, just accusation dressed as formality. She looked directly at him, her gaze level. Are you suggesting that my money is suspicious? I'm saying, he replied, with the smug detachment of someone who thinks they're untouchable, that it's the bank's responsibility to investigate any deposit that might not be, well, clean. The word hung in the air like a slap. Clean. Not accurate. Not professional. Personal. A flush crept into the banker's face, not from shame, but from the tension of performing suspicion while knowing he had no facts, no real reason, just a feeling, just a woman in a sweater who had waited all day with too large a check in too small a purse. Gloria's voice didn't waver. I've provided every legal document. Everything is in order. If you're following policy, then follow it. But don't dress your assumptions as procedure. He reached for a folder, pretending to read something that wasn't there. We may need to file a SAR. That's a suspicious activity report. It's not personal, but it was. And they both knew it. She sat still, measured, but inside, the storm was forming. Not one of rage, but of resolve. A storm built from every moment in her life when she'd been told she didn't belong. When hard work wasn't enough. When silence was mistaken for weakness. Outside the glass walls, people moved about their business. Inside, the banker was still talking, piling on phrases like due diligence and high risk and unusual origin. None of it applied. But he said it anyway, and said it like she wouldn't understand. What he didn't know was that she understood all of it. Every word, every glance, every attempt to make her feel like the burden. She opened her purse. The banker leaned back slightly, unsure of what she might produce, perhaps expecting more paperwork, perhaps hoping she'd withdraw the check and walk out. Instead, she pulled out her phone. Her fingers moved with practiced certainty as she typed a number. She didn't speak loudly, but her voice carried. Hi, I'm at the bank. They've raised concerns about the legality of the funds. Yes. Still no paperwork reviewed. I'll hold. The banker blinked. His confidence wavered just enough to show the first crack. He didn't know who she was calling. He didn't know that on the other end of the line was Elijah Jenkins, her son, a Harvard-trained civil rights lawyer with a reputation for making institutions remember their boundaries. The kind of man who didn't need to raise his voice because the law always spoke louder. She didn't raise her voice either. She didn't have to, because this time they weren't just going to hear her. They were going to answer to her. They didn't see him walk in at first. Not when the door opened. Not when his polished shoes struck the floor with precise, deliberate steps. The room had long since grown comfortable in its arrogance. Gloria Jenkins was still seated at the desk, her eyes calm but focused, her phone now resting silently on the counter after that quiet but decisive call. The banker had gone still after the word attorney passed her lips, but he quickly forced a return to his earlier tone. Clinical, defensive, detached. Ma'am, it's not personal, he had said again, as if repeating it might make it true. She had offered no further response, just looked at him. Not with fury, but with something colder. Disappointment. Then the door opened again, and everything began to change. The man who entered was tall, mid-30s, dark suit, lean frame, the kind of presence that commands a room without speaking. His gaze scanned the lobby with the speed of someone who was used to reading people in seconds. He didn't look lost. He wasn't looking for permission. His eyes found Gloria and didn't waver. Elijah, she said softly. He nodded. Mom. The banker, who had just finished asking for additional identification and casually mentioned possible involvement of federal investigators, looked up, startled. His mouth opened, then closed. Elijah's approach was silent but absolute. He walked to the desk, set down a leather briefcase, and extended his hand toward the banker. Elijah Jenkins, civil rights attorney. I'm representing my mother. The words landed like a pin drop in a quiet courtroom. The banker hesitated. I wasn't aware that. No, Elijah cut in, his voice calm but sharpened by precision. You weren't aware because you didn't care to find out. You refused service for 7 hours. You ignored her credentials, disrespected her presence, and then escalated the insult by questioning the legality of her funds without cause. Am I missing anything? I was just following protocol, the banker stammered, sweat beginning to bead at his temples. Elijah opened the briefcase with one fluid motion and placed a document on the desk. This is a notarized portfolio of all financial documentation. Real estate contracts, sale history, tax records. Everything you should have asked to see 7 hours ago before you decided she didn't belong here. A hush fell over the bank. Other staff had stopped moving. Clients nearby had turned toward the desk, watching as the room's gravity shifted entirely. Sir, I didn't mean to. I'm not here for your intentions, Elijah said. I'm here for your actions. Gloria didn't speak. She didn't need to. The silence around her now was not the silence of dismissal, but of weight, of realization, of people beginning to understand what they had been complicit in. Within minutes, a senior executive called by Elijah's office arrived, flanked by 2 others. Their faces said everything. One glance at the file, one look at the check, and the mistake was obvious. Painfully so. The executive turned to Gloria first. Mrs. Jenkins, we are so sorry. She nodded, not out of forgiveness but acknowledgement. Then the executive turned to the banker, whose face had lost all color. Your conduct has violated multiple sections of our code of service. You're being placed on immediate administrative leave, effective now. But, save it, the executive snapped. You didn't just fail your job, you failed a human being. The banker sat down, or collapsed. It was hard to tell. His hands trembled as he realized he was no longer in control of anything, not the account, not the room, not his own reputation. Elijah turned to his mother and offered his hand. Let's go, Mom. We'll handle the rest in writing. She stood, slow and steady, her purse on one shoulder, her dignity untouched. As she passed the counter where she'd once been invisible, every eye in the room followed her, not out of pity but out of respect. Hard-earned, too late, but undeniable. And as the glass doors closed behind them, the banker was left with the echo of his own assumptions. Not just costly, damning. Because sometimes the price of not seeing someone is being forced to answer for it when the world finally does. They thought they were done with her, that once she walked out those glass doors, head high but heart bruised, the day would simply go on. Another client, another file, another name on the list. But Gloria Jenkins was not just another name, and the lesson hadn't even begun. The silence that followed her exit didn't clear like it usually did. It lingered, uncomfortable, loud in its own way, the type of silence that settles into your skin and doesn't leave, the kind you carry home with you. And sure enough, within 24 hours, it wasn't just the staff whispering about what had happened. It was the board. The footage told everything. No one had to twist a word. There was Gloria, sitting quietly, patiently for 7 hours. There was the manager ignoring her file, waving off her ID, asking questions that had nothing to do with protocol and everything to do with prejudice. And there, in stunning clarity, was the moment her son arrived. That one scene, captured on video, went viral before the staff even knew it had left the building. Corporate didn't wait long. The bank's legal team requested statements from everyone involved. HR launched a full inquiry. An internal memo went out company-wide titled, Urgent Conduct Breach, Immediate Action Required. No fancy language, no softening the blow. Just accountability arriving exactly how it should, swift, public, and unshakable. By week's end, the banker who had dismissed Gloria was let go. Not transferred, not reassigned, fired. His name would no longer be attached to the institution that now scrambled to protect what was left of its credibility. His license flagged. And while they didn't say it out loud, word spread fast. He'd never work in finance again. Not after this. His sin wasn't just a mistake. It was recorded undeniable bias against a woman who had done nothing but ask to open an account with her own earned money. The branch manager, who had turned a blind eye and refused to intervene, was quietly asked to resign. Loss of leadership trust, the report said, but he knew better. He lost something far more costly than a title. He lost the respect of his entire staff, his career trajectory, and the illusion that silence was safe. Gloria never called them back. She never asked for apologies, but her attorney, her son, filed a civil suit for defamation and emotional distress. And the bank, unwilling to face court in front of a nation watching, settled quickly. The compensation package they offered was substantial, not just in dollars, but in the form of a public apology letter signed by the CEO and a scholarship fund created in her name to support women of color pursuing careers in finance. It wasn't revenge. It was restoration. As for Gloria, she didn't celebrate. She didn't post about it. When asked for comment by reporters, she simply said, "Respect isn't expensive, but disrespect will cost you everything." And just like that, she reminded them all. She didn't need to raise her voice to be heard. She just needed them to finally listen. Months later, the same branch she walked into would be featured in a new campaign about diversity and ethical service, but she never returned there. Instead, she opened her savings account in a small, family-run bank downtown. No headlines, no drama, just good people who saw her for who she was. They say what goes around comes around, but in Gloria's case, what she gave was grace, and what came back to her was dignity, truth, and justice. And for those who failed her, what came back was silence, shame, and the long shadow of a mistake that will follow them far beyond the walls of any bank. Because the world always remembers who turned away from truth, but it remembers even more those who walked in with quiet strength and left behind a legacy louder than any nameplate ever could. Long after the lawsuit had been settled, long after the press moved on and the headlines faded into archives, something lingered in the walls of that bank. The silence didn't feel the same. It was heavier now, echoing with the memory of what had happened, what had been lost, not in dollars, but in dignity. The executive team had signed their apologies. The scholarship fund had been launched in Gloria Jenkins's name. Employees had completed their new bias training modules, checking off boxes, nodding through workshops, sipping coffee in quiet discomfort. And yet, even after all the statements and settlements, something remained unsettled. Because what the bank lost wasn't just public trust. It was its moral compass. The incident revealed more than one man's mistake. It cracked open the culture that allowed it. That culture had names, smirks, avoided eye contact. It was the quiet click of a door locking behind Gloria while her $1 million check sat untouched on a desk next to assumptions dressed up as policies. Some of the staff stayed, others left, voluntarily or not, but none walked away untouched. The junior teller, who once rolled her eyes at Gloria's request, now paused a little longer when speaking to elderly customers. She found herself asking quieter questions at night. What would I have done if no one had been watching? That question haunted more people than anyone expected. The former manager, once a rising star in the company, struggled to find another job in finance. His reputation, once built on numbers, was now tied to a moment he couldn't erase. He called it an unfortunate misunderstanding in interviews, but every hiring panel could see through it. It wasn't misunderstanding, it was misjudgment, and that cost him everything. Meanwhile, the corporate board quietly reviewed other branches. They found similar complaints, smaller, buried, unresolved. It was never just about Gloria. She had become the spark that revealed the dry rot beneath the marble floors. The bank would spend millions repairing what could have been protected by a simple act of human decency. But Gloria didn't need millions. She'd already won. Her victory wasn't in headlines or lawsuits. It was in the silence that followed her. The kind of silence that reshapes people. The kind that makes a room remember your name, even when you're not in it. She never returned to that bank, nor did she need to. She opened her account at a local credit union, one where the staff greeted her with eye contact, not suspicion. where they called her Miss Jenkins without hesitation, where her money was accepted not with awe or skepticism, but with the professionalism it deserved. Quiet, simple, right. But the most powerful legacy Gloria left behind wasn't in that new bank account. It was in the space she forced open the uncomfortable, undeniable truth that some people still judge worth by appearance. And that such judgment, once exposed, doesn't just shame a person, it indicts a system. She became a symbol not because she tried to be, but because she refused to disappear. Her silence had thundered louder than any outburst. Her poise had made others' pettiness look pitiful. Her dignity had turned a humiliating moment into a mirror, one the entire industry was now forced to look into. Months later, a new manager stood at the same branch where it all happened. He addressed the remaining staff during a closed-door meeting. "This isn't about policies anymore," he said. "This is about whether or not we see the human being in front of us. Because if we forget that, if we ever forget that again, we're not just losing customers, we're losing ourselves." No one spoke, but no one needed to. The room understood. Gloria had never asked to be remembered, but they would remember her anyway. Not because she shouted, not because she sued, but because she stayed still long enough for the world to catch up and see what it had missed. In the end, her greatest statement wasn't what she said. It was what her presence revealed, that respect is not a reward we give to people who look the part. It is the starting point, and anything less will always cost more than anyone expects. This wasn't just about a bank account. It wasn't even about money. What happened to Gloria Jenkins that day was about something far more fragile: respect. She didn't walk in demanding anything. No flashy jewelry, no loud voice. Just a quiet woman, 50 years old, holding a check she earned with decades of discipline and sacrifice. But she wasn't seen. She was judged quickly, carelessly. They saw her skin before her signature, her age before her story, her sweater before her worth. And so they made her wait. 7 hours of silence, of glances, of unspoken words. 7 hours that said, "You don't belong here," until her son arrived. And when they learned who he was, everything changed. But by then, it was too late. Because the thing about dignity is once you break it, no apology can fully repair it. People lost jobs. The bank paid damages. Policies were rewritten. But what truly changed? Perhaps it was the quiet reflection, the realization that professionalism without humanity is just a uniform, that treating someone with courtesy doesn't cost a dime, but choosing not to can cost everything. Gloria didn't raise her voice. She didn't threaten. She simply stood her ground. And in doing so, she reminded us that respect is not earned by appearances. It's owed by default. Her story is not just about what was lost, but what can be found when truth is allowed to speak for itself. So if you're watching this, take a moment to reflect, not just on what happened, but on what we do every day. Do we see people, or do we judge them before they even open their mouths? If this story moved you, subscribe to our channel, leave a comment, share your own story. Because the world doesn't change with big speeches. It changes with quiet moments of recognition. Thank you for watching. Remember, subscribe to channel. And may you give and receive the kind of respect that doesn't wait to be earned. It simply begins with kindness. Wishing you a peaceful day ahead.